In 362 AD, the Emperor Julian wrote a letter to the high priest of Galatia. This is the Roman emperor to the pagan high priest. Julian, if you don't know, his nickname was Julian the Apostate. He was not a fan of Christianity. He wanted to restore Rome to the glory days, make Rome great again. And the way he was going to do that was bring back Hellenic religion. Religion, think like Zeus, Poseidon, emperor worship. And for some reason, though, this Hellenic religion that he wanted to bring back was failing miserably, while the followers of Jesus, the people he called atheists or Galileans, they kept growing and multiplying. So read part of this. This is the letter from Julian to the high priest. He says, "The Hellenic religion does not yet prosper as I desire. It is the fault of those who profess it." He's saying it's not the worship services, it's not the religion itself, it's the followers. "Why do we not observe that it is in their benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives that have done most to increase atheism?" He refers to Christians as atheists because they don't believe in all the gods. They only believe in one God. "I believe we ought really and truly to practice every one of these virtues. We need to start acting like Christians," he says. "And it is not enough for you alone to practice them, but so must all the priests of Galatia without exception. Either shame them or persuade them into righteousness, or else remove them from the priestly office. For it is disgraceful that when no Jew ever has to beg, and the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well, all men see that our people lack aid from us." So with Julian's death, Roman paganism, the Hellenic religion, would die, and Christianity would go on to cover the earth. The Bible would shape the modern Western world, our universities, our laws, our morality, our political structures, the concepts of freedom, equality, dignity, free speech, selfhood, everything. Billions would come to follow Jesus, the Galilean. So whether you consider yourself a follower of Jesus or not, if you grew up in the Western world, this is your history. That's what has shaped our imagination. That's what shaped our world. That's what shaped our culture, our lives, our nation, our politics. The American way of life was born out of this. And yet, as we pointed out last week, over the past few decades, something's changed. The earth has shifted beneath our feet. We now live in what is called a post-Christian world. It is post-Christian. It is still coming out of Christianity, responding to Christianity, but it's beyond that. It's a world that could not exist without Jesus, the Bible, Christianity, yet at the same time, it's a world that no longer follows Jesus, the Bible, or Christianity. It's a world that clings to the values of the Bible, but rejects the authority of the Bible. It believes deeply in the ideas or the values of Jesus, but it will not declare that Jesus is Lord. It is a world in which the normal American way of life is becoming increasingly incompatible with the life of Jesus. And it's a world in which our ways of doing church, just the old ways of doing church, the way we've always done church, the way of living faith, seems to be categorically failing. So we mentioned some of the key points last week of just millions, literally millions of people walking away from the faith, walking away from the church, deconstructing their faith. We've witnessed an entire generation of evangelical leaders fail. The church that once overwhelmed the Roman Empire with love, with kindness, with acts of courage, with generosity, that church that once overwhelmed the world with love is now known for being racist, hateful, anti-science, anti-equality, anti-women, anti-immigrant. Something's wrong here. So last week we started this conversation about how do we live into this moment? How do we be the church? How do we follow Jesus in a post-Christian world? And I don't want to pretend like we have all the answers. We don't. We're still figuring this out with all of you. But I said last week that we, GVF, our staff, our leaders, our elders, we refuse to sit back and just watch this happen. We refuse to not do anything. We refuse to just keep doing what we're doing. We refuse to settle for being a bunch of busy, distracted, consumeristic, anxious suburbanites. who get to go to heaven when we die. That is not the deep, rich fullness of life that Jesus promised. We want more. And we said in one sentence, if we were to say, what do we want for our church? Like, how do we want to be the church in this day, in this moment? Like, how do we feel called to follow Jesus in a post-Christian world? It's this sentence. We want to become a church where life transformation is normal. It's normal. Like that life transformation, that radical transformation from the inside out that goes out into the world in acts of love and kindness and generosity, that has this amazing vision for what life is called to be, what we're called to be, who we're called to be, our purpose in life. We want that to be normal in our church, in our time, in our lives. And we anchored this in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That normal life in this world, be it ancient Rome or modern America, will exert enormous amounts of pressure to try and shape you and conform you and form you from the outside. But if you follow Jesus, if you want to find that deep, rich fullness of life, you can't just go along with it. You can't follow along because it won't get you where you want to go. It won't lead us to where we want to be. It won't give us what it promises. It won't ultimately give us Jesus. But we ended last week with a question, and this is a real question. What does it mean to not conform to our post-Christian world? Like in ancient Rome, it was fairly simple, like Caesar worship, sleeping with temple prostitutes, leaving babies out to die, that type of stuff. Back then, like being a Christian, I'm not saying it was easy. It wasn't easy. It was dangerous. You could lose your job. You could lose your life. But it was pretty clear, like following Jesus in those situations meant not doing those things, not participating in those. But now we live in a world, in this bizarre post-Christian world, where the people who claim to worship Jesus often don't value what Jesus values. And the people, secular humanists who openly refuse to worship Jesus, often live out the values that are very close to the life of Jesus, and it is crazy confusing. I use the example of abortion, but it's not just abortion. It's gender and sexuality. It's how we pursue happiness, our definition of love, freedom, human rights, our vision of the good life. It's the way we seek our true selves. It's everything. To follow Jesus in our post-Christian world, it betrays any simple categories like pro-life, pro-choice, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, even Christian, non-Christian. All of the categories get mixed up. But here's the part that makes my head really hurt. Let's just say we could figure out the right answer to every question we have. Let's just say on every single like social, political, moral issue, every life decision that you're facing right now, we could find the right answer, the one right answer. Let's just say we as a church knew exactly the right answer on every single issue. Would that make a difference? Would that stop us from being conformed to the world? Would that lead us to become the church where life transformation is normal? And let me say, I'm doubtful. So Marshall McLuhan was a media ecologist. He studied how like media and technology, it shapes us the way like a natural environment would shape plants and animals and things like that. In the 1960s, he wrote some things about media and technology that seemed at the time radical, seemed extreme, and people were like, hey, you're making way too big a deal of this. Media and technology, they aren't changing us or affecting us that much. People are people are people. That's what it sounded like in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Today, he reads like a prophet. So McLuhan suggests that content, like the answers you get to, the content, what media is actually saying is the smallest part of how media and technology affects us. He describes it this way, and I think this might be helpful as we think about what it means to not conform to our world. He says this: content is the juicy steak carried by the robber to distract the guard dog of the mind. Now here's what he means. You get a notification. Janice from high school just tagged you in a post. So you real quick, you look at the post, you say, oh, how did Janice tag me? I haven't talked to Janice in years. You check the post and see that Janice has tagged you in a post, in an article stating that the vaccine is actually the mark of the beast from Revelation, and that you better not get the vaccine or you will certainly not be part of the rapture. what do? You untag yourself, and then you private message Janice, and you thank her for her concern that, yes, you do hope to be part of the rapture, but you suggest that maybe she reread Revelation chapter 13, maybe in light of Ezekiel chapter 9, maybe listen to GVF sermons on the book of Revelation, Now, you in your mind think, whew, I know the right answer to this one. I know the right answer to this. I navigated that complex issue. I am safe. But McLuhan says, he's suggesting right here, that the real issue here, the thing that is shaping your life, is not the idea that Janice believes the vaccine is the mark of the beast. The thing that is shaping you is that you allowed a notification to interrupt your day. It's that you were forced into a pseudo-public conversation with about 50 other people tagged in your post. It's that you felt compelled to immediately message Janice, even though you don't live in the same state or have talked to Janice in years. Content is the juicy steak carried by the robber to distract the guard dog of the mind. That while we spend all of our time trying to figure out the right answer to the latest social media crisis, or the next outrageous news article, or the next email filled with progressive nonsense, or the next thing that comes out of some super right-wing platform, while we're busy finding all the right answers, our lives and our souls are being radically reshaped by media, technology, culture itself. The culture we consume is consuming us. And then one day we wake up and we wonder, why is it that I have all the right answers and I'm so anxious and fearful and isolated and depressed and unhappy? Something's not right. See, church, we do not want to settle for being a bunch of distracted, consumeristic, anxious suburbanites who get to go to heaven when we die. So what do we do about that? What exactly are we supposed to do? What does it mean to not conform in this post-Christian world? Or positively, how do we, in this post-Christian world, how do we become a church where life transformation is normal? Today, I want to give you two main biblical images to plant these in your mind and help to reshape our imagination some. These are two images that Jesus gives us to give us some direction, to give us some hope, that all is not lost. Jesus is going to do what only he can do. Okay, so in this, I want to also get practical, and I want to talk a little bit specifically after the images about practically where GVF is headed in the next 3 to 5 years. But let's begin with the image in John chapter 14. John chapter 14, here's the setting. It's Thursday night. Friday night, Jesus is going to get nailed to the cross. Friday afternoon, Jesus tells his disciples, I am getting ready to go to my Father's house. But if I go, it'll be good for you because I'm going to prepare a place for you. And then Thomas, he's totally confused. He's like, are you going to Nazareth? Where are you headed? And we read and pick up the story, John chapter 14, verse 5. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? We have no idea what you're talking about right now. How can we know the way? And then Jesus answered, verse 6, I am the way. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, modern evangelical Christians have a hallowed tradition of using this text as a bludgeon to beat people about the head who dare think that anyone might possibly find God except through Jesus. And they read it angry, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father through me. And for some reason, though, this hasn't really worked to make more people want to follow Jesus. It's strange, I know. Now, while I do personally believe that Jesus is the only way to God, I would like to suggest that maybe that's not quite the tone of this text, and maybe that's not the best way to read it. And there's a couple reasons for this. Here's what I mean. First off, Jesus, you'll notice, is not talking to outsiders or unbelievers here. He's not talking to those who question him or question whether they need him in his life. He's talking to his closest disciples. He's talking to people who for years have been trying to figure out, what does it mean to follow you, Jesus? He's talking to people who really do believe in him. He's talking to church people. He's talking to us. So maybe we do read it angry, but maybe he is saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. But maybe the contrast isn't between believing in Jesus or Allah. Maybe the contrast is between saying, I follow Jesus, but then you go off and live a different way of life. Maybe it's saying that I believe God loves me, but then you listen to the other voices in your head more strongly. Maybe it's saying that Jesus is my life, he's what I seek, but then you spend all your time and all your money and all your energy and all your interests seeking other things. So here's why I think this might be a better reading. There's a wordplay going on here. If you've been around GVF for a while, this is going to sound super familiar. I've preached this a couple different times, so I won't belabor this. I'm just going to give it to you in brief, but I can point you back to some other messages if you want to explore this further. In Hebrew, there's a wordplay going on here. When Jesus says, I am the way, as in Hebrew, that word, the way, can mean two things. It can literally mean the way, as in like the road, the pathway. The way to my house is over there. In Hebrew, it's halakha. And it literally means a way, or road, or pathway. But halakha can also refer to the collected traditions and laws of the Jewish people. Things like practice the Sabbath, don't wear wool cotton blends, worship God alone, go on 3 long vacations a year to Jerusalem, don't abuse your animals, make sure you don't have mildew in your house, don't eat bacon, halakha. Like all of those things, those lifestyle things, all of the things both in worship and at home and on vacation, like get the image here. The laws and traditions are not just rules according to the Old Testament. They're not just something you believe in your heart. It's what you fix for dinner. It's what you wear. It's how you spend your free time and what you do with your money. It's how you work and vacation. It's how you seek justice and find reconciliation. It's how you mourn and how you celebrate. The laws and tradition are the way to do life with God, the way to know God, the way to experience the deep, rich fullness of life. And this can only be found by walking the way, by walking the way. So Jesus takes this word, halakha. It's loaded with like 1,500 years of history, 1,500 years of the people of God struggling to do life with God and mostly failing. 1,500 years of God's people sinning and messing up and experiencing God's grace over and over again and trying to figure out, like, how do we become the people of God? How do we experience the life transformation that God promised for us? And Jesus says in that moment, I am the halakha. I am the way. What you're looking for, like that deep, rich fullness of life, that justice, that equality, that dignity, that meaning, that deep inner peace, that rest, the forgiveness and healing, the love. I am the way. He's not simply calling us to believe some truths about him or to accept him in our hearts, nor is he calling us simply to do Christian things, to do Christian activities. In him, the laws of God, the truth of God, the life of God, the way of God is one. He is the halakha. All of those come together in the person of Jesus. Now, there's so much more to explore here. In fact, I preached an entire sermon on this text earlier this summer. If you want to dive in and check it out, it's called A New and Better Way to Do Life. Check it out on our podcast feed. But for today's purposes, here's what I want to point out. Just one thing. When we ask Jesus, what does it mean to not be conformed to this world, Jesus? Like, what does it mean to be transformed, to inner, inside out, to have that radical metamorphosis transformation that you promise? Notice he doesn't give us a list of do's and don'ts. He doesn't give us a course on worldviews to help us navigate post-Christian complexities. He doesn't explain the neurobiological foundations of habit formation or talk about attachment theory. He doesn't threaten or shame us. He says, I'm the way. Follow me. If you know me, if you follow me, if you stick close to me, you're headed in the right direction. Do you hear what kind of answer that is? It is relational. It is experiential. It is irreducibly personal. While it should shape everything you do, it cannot be boiled down to a set of activities. And while it should reshape how you see the world, it cannot be boiled down to a set of beliefs or intellectual facts. It demands that you personally seek him, that you personally love and argue with and talk to and live with and follow Jesus. It demands that you halak, the halakha, that you walk the way. That's the first image. The second image is from just the next chapter over, John chapter 15. Jesus, again, talking to his disciples that same night, says, John chapter 15, starting in verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire to be burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it'll be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So we ask, okay, Jesus, how do we do this thing? Like, how do we get in on this radical life transformation you promise? How do we bear much fruit? How do we experience the life of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, that life that we see in the Apostle Paul, the life that we see in you, Jesus? How do we get that? And he says, remain in me. And we're like, and do. And he's like, and nothing. Remain in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That if you remain in me, you'll grow, you'll flourish, you'll bear much fruit. If you don't, you'll be like one of those fruitless vines that withers, needs pruned. Remain in me. That's it. Again, there is so much depth to this profoundly simple image. But for our purposes, I want you to notice what kind of answer this is. It is relational. It is organic. It is experiential, and it is irreducibly personal. Like the life you're seeking, the delight, the peace, the joy, the love, the dignity, the meaning you seek, it is not found in a political party or in a workout program or in a career or in your kid's success or in your retirement or in your looks or your sexual identity or in anything this world offers. It is found in a person, and his name is Jesus. If you want to find what you're seeking, remain in him, abide, cling to him, draw your life from him. So when I teach on spiritual formation, there's something I like to do every time I teach. I like to ask people, here's the question. If someone were to come up to you and ask, how can I grow spiritually? Like, how can I experience God more deeply in that moment by moment love and trust? Like, how do I experience God like that? What would you say? And so we come up with a list, right? How would I grow spiritually? And inevitably, if it's like a normal church crowd, they say stuff like, you should read your Bible. I'm like, yeah, you should read your Bible. You should go to worship services. You sure should. You should listen to lots of sermons like mine. You should go to small group. You should serve. You should tithe. And they come up with a really good list, of like things that churches everywhere do. And then I take that list and I post it up on the wall, and then I go on and I teach, and we have a big fun time. And then later, after they've had time to forget what they said in that, I wait till later in that same teaching session, or maybe even the next day if I have time, and I ask them another question. I say, now describe for me the time in your life when you grew most spiritually. When did your love and trust in God, when did you experience that in a moment-by-moment reality? When was that deepest? When was that most real? What time in your life, what window into your life did you grow the most? And the answers they give, well, there's almost nothing on this list. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say, well, I was part of a Bible study, or I listened to one of your sermons. I wish they said that, but they don't say that. Instead, they tell stories about hardship and about life transitions, life changes, and about major transitions and about suffering. They tell stories about cancer and car accidents. They tell stories about having kids or not being able to have kids. They tell stories about going on a mission trip or getting a new job. They tell stories about when they were placed in a position when they didn't know how it was going to work out and they didn't know what they were going to do. And then I will take these two lists and I'll put them side by side and I'll ask the class this question. What gives? Why, when we're seeking to grow in our relationship with God, do we always aim towards this category? Do we always think, this is how you grow in your life with God? Why when people are young in the faith and asking, how do I grow? Why don't we tell them, hey, you know what you really need to do? You need to get in a car accident or get cancer or do something extreme or lose all your money or go through a hardship or move to another country or not be able to have a baby, have your marriage explode. Why are these two lists so radically different? Why is it that almost universally the way we grow in our relationship with God is relational, organic, experiential, and irreducibly personal, but our go-to list is all about things that you can do individually, intellectually, impersonally? So last week we opened up with this image right here, a vine and a trellis. So this is, of course, a trellis. You'll remember the picture. And then a trellis in and of itself is nothing that important, nothing that significant. It's not worth a lot. The trellis, the whole job of the trellis it's a simple support structure designed to protect and guide the growth of the vine. That's all it is. What's all important for the trellis is that it holds the vine, that it guides the vine, that the vine itself has space to grow so that it can flourish. Now, like I said, the trellis is not worth anything in and of itself. But if you do not have a trellis, what will happen is the vine will grow onto the ground. It'll be trampled, eaten by wild animals, and the fruit will all be ruined. This is the metaphor that I've been using with GVF leadership for a number of years now. You are the vine, or to get more technical from John 15, you are the branches. The trellis is the structure, and it guides and puts in place to protect and guide your growth. It's a structure. It's a guide. That's all it is. Over the past few years, it has become increasingly obvious that something is wrong, that the old trellis we've been using to protect and guide your growth, the types of questions we've been answering to help you grow spiritually, have been the wrong types of questions, that they're not bad. It's just not enough. So our trellis, our programs, our structures, the way we're doing church is not bad. It's just not enough. It's not helping us flourish. We are still being overwhelmed by post-Christian culture. So what do we do? What does it mean to not conform in this post-Christian world? How do we become a church where life transformation is normal? When we look at these images that Jesus gives us, when we consider this trellis, this image of what kind of trellis do we need? And my answer is, well, I'm not 100% sure. This is a new world for me just as it is for you. I'm still figuring this out myself. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, whatever we do, however we move forward, if we want to become a church where life transformation is normal, however we answer this question, it has to be relational, organic, experiential, and irreducibly personal. I'm going to take a risk and say that the person of Jesus, not the ideas of Jesus, not the values of Jesus, not the religion of Jesus, not the activities of Jesus, but the person of Jesus has to be central to all of it. I'm going to suggest that maybe how we do church needs to start looking more like list number two, than list number one. Has to start looking more like entering into hardships, entering into our experiences. It has to look into this relationally messiness that we live in more than just leaning into things that we can control and do. That maybe our programs, the way we do church, our trellis, should be more like following Jesus on a step-by-step journey, moment by moment, more like a branch clinging to a vine for its life. So let's get practical here and talk about what does this mean for our church? How do we actually apply this? How do we become a church where life transformation is normal? And let me be clear. We are not blank slating this thing. We are not saying, stop reading your Bible, stop going to church, stop serving, just remaining Jesus. We're not saying that. The old structures, the old systems we've been using, they are not bad. They're just not enough. Moving forward, we want to take those structures, we want to take these things that we've always been doing, and we want to add a more holistic approach to them. And here's I'm not going to go into great detail because I preached an entire series on this last fall. But let me sketch out what we mean. Your holistic process, when we talk about your formation as a person into Jesus Christ, what it means to not be conformed, but be transformed. When we talk about your part in that process, we're talking first and foremost about the stories you tell yourself, the stories that rumble around in your brain, not just beliefs, not just truth, but your mental map, the way you make sense of the world. We're talking about your habits, the things you do over and over again without thinking about them. We're talking about your relationships that very much form you. We're talking about the culture that you live in, how you consume the culture, and how the culture consumes you. And we are talking about your experiences over time. All of these things, this is what we're talking about when we talk about transformation. If you're curious about where this comes from or how this works together, what this looks like I said, I preached an entire series on this called Who Am I Becoming? I will leave it up to you to explore that. All that I want to point out here is that our approach moving forward has to address every one of these aspects. Like, we can't just tell you a Bible story and expect that it's going to change your life. You can't just listen to a sermon and expect that it's going to change your life or lead you to that deep, rich fullness of life. It has to be relational, organic, experiential, and irreducibly personal. Now, with that said, here's what we're envisioning. If we hope to become a church where life transformation is normal, the old Trellis will not do. The old way of doing church will not do. We need a new Trellis that supports and guides spiritual growth, at least in 3 ways. And the first one is this. We need a pathway. We need to script a pathway through programs. We need to use our church programs in order to create a clearly outlined pathway, inviting people from every stage of faith into their next step in their journey. Now, this is nothing new. We've already started doing this. However, what is new is we want to apply this in a holistic way. We want it to the pathway itself can't just be simple, isolated programs. Those hit you like a BB off of a cement wall here. We need to be dealing with stories that are embedded in habits, that are embedded in relationships, that create a new culture, that are embedded in experiences. It needs to have a holistic approach to it. It needs to intentionally press into each one of these. It has to be more than a program. And this will not happen on its own. So we need a dedicated staff member to develop and sustain this. To this end, I've asked Emily Tourget, our current Director of Operations, to step into this new role as GVF's first ever Director of Spiritual Formation. It's a new role for GVF and for Emily, so give us some patience here as we try and figure out what this looks like. But as soon as we can find someone to fill the office and production manager to offload what she's currently doing, she'll be shifting into this new role. More to come on that. The second thing we want to do is we want to develop a rule of life for our church. Develop a rule of life. So the Latin word for rule, for trellis, is regula. Trellis is regula. So since at least the 300s, Christians have talked about having a personal regula, a personal trellis, something that guides and supports their growth in their life, that guides their life so that it grows love for God, love for others. Today, the ancient Christian phrase, a trellis of life, is usually translated a rule of life. That's what we're talking about. Not a bunch of rules, but a trellis. It's a way of supporting and structuring and guiding your life to grow love for God and love for others. It's about having things built into your life to help guide you to live who you're called to be. We all have a rule of life, whether we know it or not. We have daily, weekly, seasonal, annual routines that shape our lives and shape our hearts. When we talk about developing a rule of life for GVF, we're simply inviting you to be intentional about that. So do you know what your rule of life is currently? Can you name all the things that structure your whole life, that are structuring your heart and soul currently? And are you intentional about those? Are those helping to grow your love for God? Are they helping to make you more anxious, busy, depressed, isolated? A rule of life takes seriously not just the content, but the method, the format, the media. It takes seriously things like technology and busyness and how those shape our soul. So it's going to take a year or two to unpack this rule of life idea, but my point is this. If we want to become a church where life transformation is normal, it's not enough for me to change our programs. You have to take personal responsibility for your life You have to choose to make changes in your daily life, in your habits, and in your rhythms and routines. The rule of life is an attempt to support you in this, an attempt to help you in this. This is the old Home Depot tagline: you can do it, we can help. You can do it, we can help. That's what the rule of life is. Now, if you're an overachiever, want to get a jump on things, or if your life is about to crash and burn and you really need some help keeping your head above water right now, I do have one recommendation. There's a book that we're going to be using. You'll hear me reference this a lot in the years to come. It's called The Common Rule by Justin Earley. It's super helpful. It introduces this rule of life idea into a very practical, contemporary way. A number of our leaders have already started reading this. And like I walk by and talk to them, and I can hear that it is just rattling their lives, blowing their minds in the best way possible. So I encourage you to check that out. Number 3, and finally, the last part of our trellis is facilities. We need to find a space that supports healthy communal formation. So for years now, I've been in the spend as little money on facilities as possible camp. I'd much rather spend our money on ministry, on mission, on helping people. But over the last few years, it has become obvious that our current facilities arrangement, or lack thereof, is hindering our ability to introduce people to Jesus and to help people live out the way of Jesus. So a metaphor could help: a family and a house. A family is clearly greater than a house. No one's going to argue that, right? A family should never serve a house. A house should serve a family. And yet, we all know that a house is extremely important, extremely formative to family life. If your family was forced to live in like multiple apartments through the year, if you had to move into a house with not enough bedrooms or one that didn't allow the entire family to eat together at the dinner table, it would be difficult on life, on the formation of the family. GVF has no place to regularly meet. We have no place to pray, to eat, to serve, to form deep relationships, to mark sacred moments in our lives. I used to think this was unnecessary or a luxury. I was wrong. In one sentence, I believe that our lack of facilities is hindering the growth of organic relationship building, spiritual gifts, gift-based service, a sense of belonging, mid-sized groups, and the ability to support the type of programming necessary to help people grow spiritually. Stated positively, if we hope to become a community where life transformation is normal, we have to solve for facilities. Now, curiously, we've been praying about this, and a lot of this, you've participated in this with us. Thank you. God has opened a door. We are currently at least exploring. We're in a conversation with another local church about a potential merger. We are seriously in prayer about this. We would love for you to join us in praying for God's direction in this. That may be our next step, or it may be something else, but we are exploring that. Again, our goal, though, is not to own a building. It's to get you it's not to own a building. It's not to get you practicing a rule of life. It's not to create a bunch of excellent programs. These are all just Trellis. What we want is to become a church where life transformation is normal, where our deep, moment-by-moment connection to Jesus forms and shapes and transforms everything we have and everything we know and everything we love and everything we do. That's our goal. See you next week.